The saga begins with Siggi, who is introduced as a son of Odin, giving him legendary status from the beginning and letting us know that Odin will be taking a special interest in this line. Siggi was in fellowship with Skadi, a man of greater stock and power than he, who owned a thrall named Bredi, who excelled in skill and accomplishments. One day, Siggi took Bredi hunting for the entire day and into the evening, and Bredi proved himself to be the superior hunter, much to Siggi's disappointment. Unable to accept the wound to his pride wrought by being bested by a mere thrall, Siggi attacked and killed Bredi and buried his corpse in a snowdrift. When Skadi asked about the venture, Siggi attempted to lie, but the truth became known and Siggi was driven away as an outlaw. With guidance from Odin, Siggi and a company provided by his father became fearsome raiders, and Siggi eventually became a great and powerful king of Hunland, the exact location of which is difficult to pin down, but according to Snorri Sturluson, the 13th century compiler of the Prose Edda, this is likely somewhere in France. As Siggi grew in years and prestige, his wife's brothers, who held his trust, conspired against him, reminding us of Siggi's previous betrayal of his trusting hunting companion. Siggi's in-laws assaulted his land and killed the aged king who was caught unprepared. Siggi's son, Reyrir, was not present during the attack. He gathered together a company of trusted companions and local chieftains, and he took back his father's land and claimed his inheritance as king. Once he was well established, Reyrir was faced with competing obligations to his kin and to his father's honor, a tense ethical position that is often found in the great Germanic legends. However, because of his uncle's great sins, Reyrir no longer counted their ties of kinship to be binding, and he honored his father with vengeance, striking down his killers and claiming more land, wealth, and power than his father ever had. During these exploits, he also took a wife, but they were unable to produce an heir, and so they implored the gods until Frigga heard their prayers and asked Odin to intervene. Odin sent one of his Valkyries, Hlod, the daughter of the giant Hrimnir, to bring an apple of fertility to King Reyrir, and she did so, dropping the apple on the king's lap. He ate of the apple, and the queen was soon found to be with child. The pregnancy lasted long, and when King Reyrir was away on a campaign, he took sick and died. In distress, the queen could not give birth for 6 years, at which point the child was finally cut out of her. The child kissed his mother, and then she breathed her last, as her life by this point was utterly spent. The boy was given the name Volsung, and he was a king and a warrior who surpassed his fathers before him. Volsung eventually married Hlod, the Valkyrie who brought the apple to his father, thereby introducing a semi-incestuous melody, if not exactly, then at least in a manner that rhymes with events that are yet to come. Volsung and Hlod bore 10 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest were the twins, Sigmund and his sister Signy. Signy's hand in marriage was requested by Siggeir, king of Gautland, and although Signy was reluctant, she honored her father's direction to accept the proposal. During a feast held to celebrate this union, a stranger entered the hall. He wore a mottled cape and hood, he was barefoot, and he had only one eye, which reveals to us that this was, in fact, none other than the All-Father Odin. This stranger brandished a magnificent sword and thrust it into the great tree that grew through the middle of the hall, and he made the declaration that whoever could draw the sword from the trunk shall receive it as a gift, and this would be a sword better than any of them had ever borne. Each of the noblest of men made their attempts, but to no avail. Finally, Sigmund, son of King Volsung, grasped his hand around the hilt and pulled it out with no effort whatsoever. It was he who would bear this great sword of the Allfather. King Siggeir offered to buy the sword for triple its weight in gold, to which Sigmund answered, "You could have taken the sword from where it stood, no less than I did, if it were meant for you to carry it. But now that it has come first into my hands, you will never obtain it, even if you should offer me all the gold you own." Siggeir was deeply offended at this, but, being an underhanded and deceitful man, he plotted his revenge in silence rather than demonstrating open scorn. Siggeir decided to leave for home the next day, but Signy implored her father to annul the marriage, for she was informed by her gift of foresight that misery would otherwise follow. King Volsung did not see sufficient reason to commit this dishonor, and so he told his daughter to continue with her new life as so agreed. Before leaving, Siggeir invited Volsung and his sons to visit him in Gautland in 3 months' time, and Volsung agreed to the offer. When the appointed time came, Signy called her father and brothers together for a private conversation. She informed them that Siggeir had gathered an unbeatable army, and that he had intended to betray the Volsung clan, and she implored them to flee. King Volsung declared that he would not betray his pride and his honor, but that he and his men would instead stand and fight. With fierce and valiant combat, Volsung charged the hostile forces of Siggeir, but Volsung's forces were no match for the overwhelming power of Siggeir's. King Volsung fell in battle, and his 10 sons were taken captive. Signy pleaded with her husband on behalf of her brothers, but he agreed only that they should not be immediately hewed down, but that they would instead be subject to torture and lingering deaths. The sons of Volsung were pinned down under a great trunk in the woods, and every night a she-wolf, who may have actually been King Sigurd's mother, transformed by sorcery, would arrive to feast on one of the brothers. This continued every night until only Sigmund was left. Before the final night that would have claimed his life as well, Signy instructed one of her trusted servants to smear honey on Sigmund's face and into his mouth. When the she-wolf arrived that evening, she did not instantly devour him, but first licked the sweet honey off his face and reached her tongue into his mouth, allowing Sigmund to bite the wolf's tongue, causing the great wolf to recoil back and split the trunk that held his feet. As she recoiled, Sigmund did not release her tongue from his teeth, causing it to be sundered from her mouth. With this great wound, the she-wolf bled out and died, and Sigmund was free to take his leave. Sigmund then took up residence in the woods as an outlaw, while Sigurd believed that he had killed the last of the Volsungs, save for his wife. Signy had 2 sons with Sigurd, whom she sent one at a time to aid Sigmund and to potentially serve as companions of revenge against Sigurd, her husband. However, both proved to be cowards, so Signy, bearing no love for her husband or his offspring, asked Sigmund to kill them, which he did without remorse. One day, when Signy was sitting in her chamber, a sorceress appeared to her. Signy requested that the sorceress change appearances with her, and, with this magic in effect, Signy went to Sigmund's home in the forest, seduced him, and laid with him for 3 nights. Sometime later she gave birth to a son, Sinfiotli, who grew to be large and strong. Sigmund and Sinfiotli raided together, sometimes as men and sometimes with the guise of enchanted wolfskins. Once Sinfiotli was fully grown, Sigmund was ready to avenge his father by striking at King Sigurd. Late in the evening, Sigmund and Sinfiotli hid themselves among ale caskets outside Sigurd's main hall. By this point, Signy and Sigurd had 2 more young sons, who were playing with golden toys, and as a golden ring rolled down the hall, the boys chased after it. Sigmund and Sinfiotli presented themselves with terrifying appearance to these children, and Signy told Sigmund to kill them, but Sigmund stays his hand this time. Sinfiotli, however, has no qualms with dispatching his half-brothers, and he swiftly does so. Their bodies were then cast into the hall of King Sigurd, who called the guards to his defense. Sigmund and Sinfiotli fought valiantly, but they were eventually overpowered, bound and fettered, and sealed alive in a stone cairn. However, Signy had subtly provided them with provisions, including Sigmund's great sword given to him by Odin. With this noble blade, Sigmund cut through the rock, and the 2 left freely, and promptly returned to the hall of the king, which they set ablaze. Sigmund asked Signy to leave with him, at which point she revealed that Sinfiotli is his son, and that she had plotted all of these years for vengeance against her husband. She finds contentment in knowing that the deed had been done, but she believes that her life was spent in the process, and she now must die in the flames alongside her husband. Sigmund takes the throne and marries Borghild, who gives birth to a son, Helgi. When Helgi was of age, he desired to marry Sigrun, daughter of King Hogni. However, Sigrun was betrothed to King Hrothbrod, so naturally, Helgi and Sinfiotli invade Hrothbrod's realm, Helgi usurps his kingship, and then marries Sigrun. Sinfiotli also finds a woman that he desires to marry, but he must kill a competing suitor in order to secure her hand. It turns out that this suitor was actually Borghild's brother. In vengeance, she poisons and kills Sinfiotli, leading Sigmund to cast her out. In his old age, Sigmund married another, named Hjordis, much to the anger of King Lyngvi, who also sought her hand. Lyngvi attacked Sigmund, and in the midst of the battle, Odin appeared, armed with his spear to make divine intervention. Sigmund struck Odin's spear shaft with his sword, but the blade shattered on impact as this mysterious spearman vanished. That evening, Hjordis found the languishing Sigmund on the battlefield among the slain. Sigmund informs Hjordis that she is carrying a son in her womb, and tells her to guard the shards of the sword that was broken. Shortly thereafter, Prince Alf of Denmark arrives and collects spoils from the battlefield and Hjordis for his wife. She gives birth to Sigurd, son of Sigmund, who is raised in the Danish court. Sigurd grows to be strong and valiant in the tradition of his fathers, and eventually his tutor Regin reveals to him the story of Fafnir the dragon, who we come to find is in fact Regin's brother, who killed their father to secure a great treasure for himself. As C.S. Lewis said of Eustace Scrubb's dragoning, sleeping on a dragon's hoard with greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart, he had become a dragon himself. Thus we have Fafnir the dragon, who would find no Aslan to remove his scales. Regin reforges the sword of Odin that was broken, thereby providing Sigurd with a legendary sword known as Gram. Before facing off with the dragon, Sigurd uses his sword for vengeance, slaying his father's killers. With this duty fulfilled, he faces off with the dragon, which he readily dispatches before liberating its great wealth, including the dreaded Helm of Fear. He roasts the dragon's heart, and when its enchanting blood touches his mouth, he gains wisdom, which now allows him to understand the speech of birds. Sigmund hears the birds discussing how Regin intends to betray Sigmund, so Sigmund acts preemptively and strikes Regin down. With great wealth and power, Sigurd goes to Frankish lands and vows to marry the Valkyrie, Brynhild. However, the sorceress Grimhild bewitches Sigurd into forgetting about Brynhild, so he would marry her daughter, Gudrun, and she also tells her son Gunnar to marry Brynhild. Sigurd and the 3 sons of Grimhild go to King Budli, father of Brynhild, so that Gunnar may ask for her hand in marriage. Brynhild is in a hall surrounded by fire, and will only marry one who is brave enough to ride through the flames, as she believes that only her Sigurd would perform such a feat. She is correct, but Sigurd, still bewitched, knows nothing of his connection to Brynhild. So, in service to Gunnar, they switch appearances, and Sigmund, appearing as Gunnar, passes through the flames and secures her hand in marriage for Gunnar. Brynhild eventually discovers what happened, and she falls into deep despair, only desiring to wed the great and courageous Sigurd. Attempting to deal with this problem, Gunnar gives his brother wolf and snake meat, which sends him into a violent rage with which he stabbed the sleeping Sigurd. Before dying, Sigurd throws Gram and cleaves his assailant in two. Brynhild tells Gunnar that what he did was wrong, and she stabs herself in despair and dies. Grimhild orders Gudrun, Sigurd's widow, to marry King Atli, also known as Attila the Hun, who proves himself to be treacherous. Under false pretenses, Gunnar and his brother Hogni are summoned to the court of King Atli, who desires the treasure of Sigurd. Hogni's heart is cut out, and Gunnar is bound and cast into a pit of snakes. Gudrun is able to give Gunnar a harp, which he plays with his toes, sending all the serpents into a slumber, except for one, which bites his heart and proves his doom. In retaliation, Gudrun kills Atli's sons and feeds their blood and hearts to their father. Gudrun and Hogni's son, Niflung, then stabs Atli while he is sleeping and sets his court ablaze. Feeling her life spent by this point, Gudrun attempts to cast herself into the sea, but she was carried by the waves to the fortress of King Gjonukur, whom she married and bore 3 sons, who were raised alongside Svanhild, her daughter by means of Sigurd. Svanhild was exceedingly beautiful, and her hand was desired of King Jormunrek, but she instead marries his son, Ranver. In response, Jormunrek has his son hanged, and Svanhild trampled by horses. In revenge, Gudrun's sons cut off Jormunrek's hands and feet, but he calls for his housecarls, who, with Odin's guidance, kills Gudrun's sons. And so ends the saga of the Volsungs.